Hi, this is Brian too. It's 11 o'clock. I woke up with severe pain to chest and head and ears, pulsating, throbbing pain to head and ears. A whooshing sound when I swallow. It's caused by acoustic trauma. The doctor, if you look at the last hearing doctor's report, she states that I've been attacked with an acoustic trauma. I've been exposed to acoustic trauma. It's part of the torture. Also, my hands. I don't know what's going on. They incapacitate the victim slowly. Um, and for some reason, targeting my hands. Training, research, and development, and direct behavioral control. I don't know what's going on. But they targeted my heart and other regions of my anatomy, so it doesn't surprise me they're targeting my hands. Target a person's hands, they no longer function properly, and that person basically becomes a paraplegic. Trauma-based mind control is achieved in increments, and pain inflicted at regular intervals each day over a long period of time. They use physical and psychological trauma. I don't see. Do you see the discoloration in the hand? There's no reason why my fingers and my palm should be so red, much less pins and needles sensation, partially numb and throbbing. When I wake up every morning or every afternoon, they knock me out until I'm forced into sleep. But this is what's happening. They are forcing me into synthetic telepathy conversations. It's as clear as a cell phone call. And I did the research to find out why these things happen, and it's to probe memories, to harass and interrogate the victim, to distract and torture the victim into submission to the system's influences, etc., etc. That's all part of trauma-based mind control. But they're actually using it also to probe memories, and I can't quite understand. Because some of it seems absolutely absurd, especially with some of the horrific imagery, two-dimensional imagery. If you wanted to describe what the visual and verbal entrainments look like, and the visual verbal neuroprogramming, there have been days where I just would wake up suddenly, but I would remain motionless with my eyes closed and wouldn't move, and could see the neuroprogramming. And I would compare it to a PowerPoint presentation, like where they use two-dimensional images in a slideshow format, and audio and visual cues, in that type of format. That's what I would. That's how I've experienced their neuroprogramming. Constant attacks on my faith and belief system. For example, the neuroprogramming. One morning, I just laid there motionless and woke up, and there was a giant disc of light, as bright as the sun. Giant disc of light, bright and large as the sun, being slowly eclipsed by quickly eclipsed by a giant disc of darkness, as black as night. I mean, it was very black. And the chatterbox, the automated special language program that they use for neurolinguistic programming, etc., for verbal entrainments and so forth, was saying over and over while this solar eclipse was happening, Jesus is darkness, Jesus is darkness, Jesus is darkness, over and over again in a looping pattern. So that's what I would compare the neuroprogramming to. Horrific images of the victim, mind control, trauma-based mind control victim is forced to watch child pornography. He's forced to, again, The events targeting his faith and belief system seem to be tied to the event, part of the neuroprogramming anyway, that they're using on. I guess religion is a very important part of their technology, how to manipulate a person's religious belief or faith, but it seems to be always tied to that. So if it's for me, they've used hauntings where I'd wake up and people would be standing over me for a few seconds, and I'd hear the voice, "Time to get up, Brian," and I'd wake up suddenly, and this giant would be standing over me, and then within a few seconds, smiling, and then within a few seconds, he would disappear from my visual field, and then every night that would happen, but it would happen each time when I wake up. So apparently, the technology is most effective during theta state, where it's easier to modify the victim's active memory, and more difficult for the victim to fight back against the system's influences. But it's kept happening with people showing up in my room, and I'd look, and these images people would just disappear within a few seconds. And it's done to make the victim not only appear crazy and discredit the victim, but to cause the victim to begin to physically and psychologically shut down from fear and paranoia, etc. So I researched what was happening. They were targeting my visual cortex with streams of specific electromagnetic low frequency waves, causing me to see things. And that's why they would only last for a few seconds before they would disappear from my visual field. This high-pitched screeching sound that I'm hearing right now every day, but especially in the mornings and night, is called the microwave hearing effect. But it's not just that, because they're using ultrasound to target and damage my ears. I listen to Christian music, and the music interferes with their neuroprogramming. It interferes with their remote neural monitoring system and the different stages of remote neural monitoring, such as formulation, collection of data regarding the memories of the victim, predictive integration, the interpretation of that data, of the memories of the victim that are collected during the silent monitoring period, etc. All those different stages of formulation of remote neural monitoring, predictive integration, etc. And so they have the choice but to stop it, and the way they stop it is they damage the victim's ears until the victim can't hear properly anymore, and the lyrics of the music become so, Christian music becomes so severely distorted that it's painful to listen to, and therefore no longer constitutes a dominant stimulus, and training the brain away from the visual and verbal entrainments at the subliminal level of the R&M system to the pleasing music, shifting the focus of attention away from the R&M system, preventing the R&M system from locking onto the emotional state of the victim. It locks onto whatever it deems causes the most pain and suffering. It locks onto the emotional state of the victim. This is because the technology is designed to provoke the victim constantly. The system itself, not just the tactics of the hive mind teams and the surveillance teams and the organized stalkers, etc., but the actual technology, the system that remote neural monitoring, remote neural manipulation, it's designed to constantly provoke the victim using trauma and pain into emotional responses to generate response statistics which can be correlated into coherent patterns of thought, and once correlated into coherent patterns of thought, then integrated back into R&M data. The process is endless and can be activated, triggered at will by the attackers. The data that they're using, this is a fabricated and falsified stream of data that they're using, and they torture the victim to near incoherency, so that the victim, again, can't fight back against the system's influences. Anything which lowers the victim's energy level or vitality makes the person more susceptible to mind control programming. So the fabricated and falsified stream of electromagnetic low frequency waves that they're using, that targeting my cerebral cortex with right now and other trauma-based mind control victims, is fabricated and falsified, meaning they use the victim's own memories against them, which were captured by the system during the silent monitoring period by this bidirectional stream of electromagnetic low frequency waves they tied the victim's brain to the computer with, called the information and injection feedback loop. They're able literally to dial into the cerebral cortex of the victim as one would dial into a cell phone. The technology is designed to make the victim become dependent upon the system, on the system's output, I should say, or at least for them to understand that these responses from the victim which they're seeing are consistent. And at that point, where the victim begins to believe the responses are his own, or at least those responses appear to be consistent to the hive mind teams, that's when the RNM system begins to fabricate these subconscious responses of fear and paranoia and positive recognition, anxiety, etc. It's all a game. It's all a deadly, deadly game of deception and manipulation, nothing more. So the person is not aware, designed to make the victim dependent upon the system. So if a person is unaware that these remote neural attacks and impulse injections, or impulse sequencing, I should say, are happening, the victim then no longer understands and will no longer be able to ascertain that the RNM system is beginning to slowly shape, more subtly at first, his daily motives and emotional perceptions, causing the victim to begin to make minor choices. That's what remote neural manipulation is about. The ability of the system is wholly dependent upon its ability to predict and influence the reference choices of the mind control victim during thought composition. As the victim is formulating his thoughts and preparing to act, attempting with these remote neural attacks, impulse injections, etc., to modify the victim's active memory in order to picture the victim into some type of action or access sequence for the purposes of verification, direct behavioral control, etc. And that's what I go through on a daily basis, but it involves a lot of trauma and pain, especially they target at my ears. So now that when I listen to Christian music, it's distorted, no longer constitutes a dominant external stimulus, and therefore no longer breaks brain entrainment with their system, or entrains the brain, or temporarily alters my brainwave signature, which music does. Music causes them, pleasing music causes them serious problems, because it produces all this additional energy inside the neural pathways of the victim's brain. The system can't make sense of what it sees. The hive mind teams can't make sense of what they see, because it lights up the brain like a pinball machine. Just about every area or region of the brain is affected by pleasing music. And this additional energy inside the neural pathways not only prevents the system from mapping out coherent patterns in relation to the behavior, they're linking descriptions with evoked potentials and mapping patterns with impulses and identifiers, but it also actually jams the information and injection feedback loop, making remote neural attacks and impulse injections, impulse sequencing in real time impossible. So they have to stop that, and what they've done to me, and what the doctors have confirmed, if you look at the videos on YouTube, the doctors allow me to record the examinations and their opinions. I have severe acoustic trauma to both ears, bilateral hearing loss, etc. One of the many symptoms of my torture appear to be my head, my ears, and my chest, abdomen region. So they're targeting my internal organs, with specific emphasis on the autonomous systems of my body. In this case, I've been experiencing a lot of attacks on my cardiovascular system and circulatory system, but it's also neurological. I don't understand why they're targeting my hands, but obviously if trauma-based mind control is to be effective, it cannot be effective without trauma. Again, they're using trauma to map out the physical and neural pathways of the victim's brain and central nervous system. So this high-pitched screeching sound and the other symptoms of the brutal long-term directed energy torture, which is designed to be brutal precisely so no one will believe, doesn't end until the death of the victim. This is Brian 2, Quito, Ecuador, May 27, 2017.